Okay, welcome. Today is day 5 of Bible in 90 days. We're reading through the Bible like a novel from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And every day I'm doing these video summaries just to summarize what we've read, in the day, just chapter by chapter. So today, obviously, we're getting into the book of Exodus, which is a new book. We just finished Genesis yesterday, so you can look at those videos on the Facebook page or on the YouTube, channel. So today, we start off with Exodus chapter 1. That starts off with kind of a reminder that there was only 70 people that Jacob and his family came with, from Canaan into Egypt. At this point, Israel has grown and multiplied a lot within Egypt, and the scripture says a new king comes over Egypt, who did not know what Joseph had done for Egypt, and what his story was and how the Israelites had got to Egypt. So I'm guessing this was after a very, very long time, where maybe the oral traditions will have stopped by then. But anyway, this new Pharaoh, this new king of Egypt, is threatened, by the number of Israelites that are actually in Egypt. And what they do is they put Israel to forced labor, so as to kind of oppress them and keep them from revolting or whatever else, because they don't want that happening in the case that a war breaks out. So, but unfortunately or fortunately, the more that they are oppressed, the more the Israelites are oppressed, the more they actually grew. So Pharaoh start some new schemes, i.e. to try and kill all the newborn babies as they are born, but the midwives, they lie around that and make sure that they don't kill the babies. So he finds another scheme as well now to say, okay, every time a newborn baby, a male, is born, they should be thrown into the Nile River so that they can drown, which is horrendous. But anyway, what happens then? We get into Exodus chapter 2. A Levite woman, Levite meaning from the tribe of Levi, who was one of the sons of Jacob. She has a baby boy, and obviously she doesn't want to kill the baby boy, so she hides him for 3 months. Then after that, because she can't hide him any longer, she puts him into a basket and floats him in the Nile River, just hoping, something would happen. And that's obviously where we get the term Moses baskets, from. So as she floats it over, so it just so happens that the daughter of Pharaoh is, bathing in the Nile River. She sees the basket, she sees the boy. Obviously she's got compassion for the boy, and she looks for a nurse, to nurse the boy. The nurse just so happens to be the mother of Moses. So Moses is actually raised by his mom in the palace, and not killed. So the name, obviously, Moses, means I drew him, from the water. Moses grows up. He grows up. He knows that he is an Israelite. One day he sees an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite, and he kills that Egyptian. But then people notice, and maybe he didn't know that they had noticed, but people that actually noticed. So the next day, when he's just trying to be a peacemaker between two Israelites, they say, listen, are you going to try and kill me like you did the Egyptian, the last time? Now he knows. People know that he killed somebody. Pharaoh now knows, and obviously Pharaoh now wants to kill Moses. So what Moses has to do is to flee. He has to flee to Midian. When he gets to Midian, he rescues these daughters that had come to water their livestock. And as a result, as things go ahead, he ends up being part of that family. He marries into that family, and he has a son called Gershom. Now, the king of Egypt finally dies, the one who wanted to kill Moses, but the Israelites are still in slavery. They're still, in forced labor and oppression. And the Israelites, they cry out to God, and God hears that cry. That's where Exodus 2 finishes. Exodus 3, Moses is out doing his whatever he was doing at the time in the in the forest, or with his livestock, and he comes to the place and he sees a burning bush when God is speaking to him from this from this burning bush. And God was saying, listen, I know the sufferings of Israel, and I have come, I am going to take them out of Egypt and and save them. So obviously God wants to use Moses, but Moses is not keen. He's making excuses. Oh, I can't speak, or they won't believe me. How would they know that you sent me? Who are you? What shall I tell them? Etc. Etc. But God insists and says, listen, okay, I will send you. I know that when I send you, these people, or the Egyptians, will not let the Israelites go unless I compel them by a strong hand, by signs and wonders. And then God says he would strike Egypt, or he would strike Pharaoh, with these plagues until a certain point where they would, let them go. Exodus 4. Moses was given these signs so that he could, speak to the elders of the Israelites, to prove to them that God had appeared to him and that he could actually carry out this, task of getting the Israelites, out of, Egypt. So there was things like he had a staff that would change into a snake. He could put his hand in his cloak and take it out, and it would have a skin disease, and put it back, and it'll be okay. And also he could convert water to blood. So these were just signs that would prove for sure that Moses had been sent, by God. So in that we get to hear even more of Moses' excuses that he didn't want to go to Egypt and do this task. Blaming a speech impediment. So God says, okay, you can go with Aaron, your brother. He will do the speaking, but you need to you need to go with him. So God reminds him again that he was going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So he said, this is not going to be, hey Pharaoh, let the Israelites go, and they're going to go. He says there was going to be a process of hardening of Pharaoh, and he was going to be stubborn until such a time when the plagues would have happened, that Pharaoh would eventually let them go. God also tells them at that point that the last sign, the very last sign, or the last plague upon the Egyptians would be the killing, of the firstborn, or the firstborn son. So they get to the elders. The elders are on board with and say, okay, let's go to Pharaoh. That's how we get to Exodus chapter 5. Exodus chapter 5, Moses and Aaron, they go to Pharaoh. But in response, Pharaoh actually oppresses the Israelites even more, because he's saying, you guys are busybodies. You've got no time. You've got so much time on your hands. You're coming to me to ask me to let you go. So he then says, make the bricks, because they were making bricks, make the bricks, without straw. The same quota of bricks were required, but they had to go and find, their own straw. So obviously the people complain to Moses, say, ever since you came back telling us about all this, deliverance message or whatever else, the Pharaoh is now oppressing us even more. Exodus 6, God kind of reintroduces himself to Moses to say, okay, this is who I am, this is why I'm sending you, and this is exactly what is going to happen. But the people now, they have a hard time believing that, because their present circumstances are saying, listen, the more we talk about this deliverance stuff, the more we're actually getting oppressed. We then get a bit of a genealogy of the forefathers of Moses and Aaron, so that you see exactly where they came from the tribe of Levi and people like Amram, etc. And there's still this hesitation, obviously, from Moses, to go to Pharaoh. Exodus chapter 7, God tells Moses, to go. He will perform these signs, wonders. He will harden Pharaoh's heart, and eventually, they will be let go. Pharaoh is then shown some signs by Moses and Aaron, but because his magicians, because Pharaoh had these magicians that could redo the tricks or the signs that Moses and Aaron were doing, he hardened his heart even more to say, well, if my guys can do exactly the same thing that you're showing me, then why should I let these people go and believe that whoever it is, sent you to let these people go. So we then have a succession of plagues in the following chapters that are trying to convince Pharaoh to let the people go. So for example, in Exodus chapter 8, there are frogs, that come up over all the land. But again, Pharaoh can reproduce that. His magicians can reproduce that. There's a plague of flies. But still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, because some of these things, again, like I said, the magicians could reproduce them. But in certain plagues, God would make sure that whatever was happening would only happen in Egypt, or in the position where the Egyptians were staying, but not in Goshen, where the Israelites were staying. But still, this did not convince, Pharaoh. So, they try and negotiate here and there. Okay, maybe only the animals can go, maybe only the men can go, etc. But that was not what Moses and Aaron were asking for. They wanted everybody, to be taken out of Egypt. Exodus chapter 9, we get to see some more plagues, plagues of striking all the livestock, plague of boils, plague of hail, where humans and animals and plants were destroyed. But still, Pharaoh hardens his heart because God was hardening his heart, as he had said that he would do. In Exodus chapter 9 verse 16, which you should probably go and read for yourself, we see some perspective from God as to why he was hardening Pharaoh's heart. Then we get to Exodus chapter 10. Again, more insight in verse 1 and 2 into why Pharaoh's heart was being hardened. We can get the plague of the locusts. Then the locusts, they ate all the plants and the fruits. But at this point, Pharaoh is almost like softening up, and he says, okay, if you chase the locusts away, I will let the people go. But as soon as they do that, Pharaoh hardens his heart again and says, no, the Israelites are not going anywhere. And they were trying again to negotiate, say, okay, everybody can go except for the animals. But Moses and Aaron insist that no, the people, the animals, the women, the children, everybody, should go. So at this point now, I think that's like probably plague number 8. Then we have the plague of darkness. So it became so dark in Egypt that the Bible says that the darkness could be felt. I don't even know what that feels like, to have a darkness that could be felt. But obviously within Goshen, where the Israelites were, these things were not happening. But again, still Pharaoh hardens his heart and is still stubborn and would not let the Israelites go. So obviously then there is the forewarning of the final plague to say, okay, now I'm about to kill all the firstborn sons, the firstborn animals, the firstborn of everything, obviously except for the Israelites. So Exodus chapter 12, we get then to maybe the eve of of this plague of the killing of the firstborn, and the Israelites are given these instructions to kill a lamb, to prepare certain kind of bread and have the lamb with certain kind of food. Then the blood of the lamb would be taken and kind of sprinkled or painted on the doorpost, so that when the angel of death would come, it would pass over the doors of the Israelites. So that's where we get the term Passover. It's just basically the angel of death would pass over that door and go ahead and kill the rest of the Egyptians, but leave the Israelites as they were. So obviously at midnight, this then happens. Obviously there's great wailing, a lot of grief within Egypt, and at this point Pharaoh can no longer continue to keep the Israelites, because Egypt is practically getting destroyed. So he then forces all the Israelites out, says, okay, just go, take your animals, take your women, take your children, and everything else. And Exodus 12 at that point tells us that 430 years had passed. Now, Exodus 13, there were some instructions that were given for a festival called the Festival of Unleavened Bread. Then consecration of the firstborn as a sign, because the children or the firstborns of the Egyptians had been killed. So this was more of a sign to say, okay, as maybe a remembrance of what had actually what had happened. It also, Exodus 13 also tells us that the Israelites, instead of going straight to Canaan, they were led through a roundabout way, so that if the war kind of followed them or whatever, they would not change their minds and try and go back to Egypt, but continue on their course. Also, as they were in the desert, they would be led by a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night, to just kind of to guard. But guess what? In Exodus chapter 14, Pharaoh hardens his heart again, and he's like, he almost wakes up and says, oh my gosh, we have let these people go, so we're gonna have to chase after them and bring them back so that they can continue to be our slaves. So obviously they're approaching the Israelites. The Israelites are they're afraid. They complain to Moses and say why we should have just stayed in Egypt, where everything was fine, but here we are. So at this point, this is where the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea happens, because they're about to get to the sea. Obviously Pharaoh and them are chasing them. Then obviously the Red Sea splits. The Israelites manage to get through, to salvation, whilst the Pharaoh and his soldiers, etc., they get in there and they are, they're drowned by the flood. So because of this, I think this was one of the things that really woke the Israelites up, and they started to really believe that God was for them and he was going to deliver them. The last chapter of today is Exodus 15, where there is a song called a Song of Moses, where Moses is just recounting what had happened and the great deliverance that God had wrought for them. Then they also get to this place called Mara, where there was this bitter water. Again, the people complained to Moses, saying, this is not fresh water. Then Moses was given a piece of wood that he put in the water, and the water became sweet. God then comes in and says, listen, I need you to obey, my commands, and, have trust, that I will take you through this. Then we end off with Israel being at a place called Elim. So the story has moved very quickly, obviously, from the beginning with with creation, then Adam, then Noah, then Abraham, then the sons of Abraham, Isaac, through all the way to Jacob. Then we went through the story of Joseph, which then brought all the Israelites to Egypt, and then in Egypt, as they grew, obviously they became a threat, etc., until now they're coming out. So I think Exodus actually means coming out. So hopefully that's helpful. Please share the video with your friends, and if you've got any questions, just send me a message or whatever, and hope to see you again tomorrow.